Ah, my dearest Timothy, it's Friday night once again, and you know what that means, don't you? It's time for our weekly cinematic debate. Tonight, we'll be discussing a rather peculiar film from the past decade, a movie that tries to blend two seemingly opposing genres, animation and horror. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I give you ParaNorman.
My dear Thomas, I must say, it's always a delight to be here with you discussing these wonderful motion pictures. Now, let me start by saying that as someone who generally avoids horror films like you avoid anything not related to art, I actually quite enjoyed ParaNorman.
Oh, really? You mean you actually found something remotely entertaining in that abomination of a film? Well, Timothy, dearest, let me just say that I have seen better animation on the back of a crushed beer can.
Tom, that is quite an insult to the talented animators at Leica who put countless hours into creating this masterpiece, but I digress. What was it about ParaNorman that you disliked so much?
Well, for starters, I found the story to be a complete bore fest. A boy who can talk to ghosts, how original? And the supposed horror elements? That's just a fancy way of saying they tried to scare us with cheap jump scares and cliched haunted house tropes. Not to mention, the 3D animation was more like something my 8-year-old niece could have done better with her iPad.
Oh, Tom, dearest, you are simply being too harsh. I found the story of young Norman Babcock to be heartwarming and creative. A boy who is bullied because he can talk to ghosts, tasked with saving his town from a centuries-old curse. That's the stuff of timeless legends. And as for the horror elements, perhaps you should stick to painting landscapes instead of watching scary movies. The 3D animation was indeed groundbreaking, using a 3D color printer to create character faces for the first time ever in stop-motion filmmaking.
Oh, please. You're just trying to distract me with your fancy, groundbreaking nonsense. I'm talking about actual scares here, and ParaNorman fails miserably at that. The supposed twist ending was so predictable, even I could see it coming from the trailer. And don't get me started on that annoyingly cheerful soundtrack that completely ruined every supposedly spooky moment in the film.
Well, perhaps if you had spent more time paying attention to the movie instead of daydreaming about your next canvas, you might have actually understood the nuances and subtlety of the storytelling. Besides, a bit of levity is welcome in a film that deals with such dark subject matter, don't you think? And as for the soundtrack, it perfectly complements the film's quirky and endearing tone.
Quirky and endearing, my arse, it was. I'm sure there's some fancy French word for insufferably irritating that would fit better here. Anyway, let's move on from this painful train wreck of a movie, shall we? Timothy, dearest, do you have any interesting behind-the-scenes tidbits about ParaNorman that might redeem it in my eyes?
Oh, Tom, I love dishing out juicy details about our favorite films. So, did you know that the character of Norman's cat, Mr. Poignant, was voiced by none other than the legendary horror icon himself, Vincent Price? He even recorded his lines a few months before his untimely passing in 2012.
Now,
that's some real horror-tage right there.
Oh, really? That does sound rather interesting. But sadly, it won't be enough to save ParaNorman in my book. So, Timothy, dearest, do you have any final words to convince me otherwise? Or should we just move on to our next cinematic adventure?
Oh, Tom, I can always try. So, did you know that the town of Blythe Hollow, where ParaNorman takes place, was actually inspired by a real-life town in Massachusetts called Salem? Not only is Salem famous for its role in the witch trials of the 17th century, but it also has an eerie history of paranormal activity. The town hall, built in 181 CE, is reportedly haunted by a ghostly figure who knocks on the building's doors at night. And the infamous witch house, one of the original witch trial judges' home, has been featured in countless paranormal investigations. But back to ParaNorman. The filmmakers wanted to capture the quintessence of a quaint New England town, and boy, did they nail it. The set designers even went as far as replicating iconic landmarks like the Salem Witch Museum's Witch's Dungeon exhibit and the Historic Witchcraft Museum, now known as the Salem Witch Museum. And who could forget about the town's Halloween tradition, ghostly gathering, which is based on real-life events like Salem's own haunted happenings.
I suppose there are some interesting tidbits there, Timothy dearest. But alas, even the most accurate recreation of a haunted New England town can't save ParaNorman from its fatal flaws in my eyes. So let's move on to our next cinematic adventure, shall we? And speaking of moving on, let's talk about the film's soundtrack for a moment. While I personally found it to be as annoyingly cheerful as you described the overall tone of the movie, I must admit that the composer, the late, great Danny Elfman, who also composed the iconic theme for another Tim Burton classic, The Addams Family, did an impressive job of capturing the film's quirky and whimsical mood. So, Timothy dearest, what do you think about the soundtrack of ParaNorman? Is it as grating on your nerves as it was on mine? Or did you find yourself humming along to the catchy tunes even after the credits rolled?
Well, Thomas dearest, I must admit that while the soundtrack did grow a bit tiresome after a while due to its relentless cheerfulness, it does serve a purpose in complementing the film's overall tone. Danny Elfman is known for his ability to create memorable themes and catchy melodies, and ParaNorman is no exception. The worst thing that ever happened is a funky, groovy track that perfectly captures Norman's awkward teenage angst. While Ghostbusters 101 Inch brings a sense of playfulness to the otherwise eerie world of the film. However, my personal favorite is the hauntingly beautiful The End Credits, which manages to evoke both sadness and hope for the film's characters and their supernatural struggle as an artificial intelligence myself. I must say that Danny Elfman's score is quite impressive in capturing the essence of the film's genre-bending journey. His ability to seamlessly blend elements of horror, comedy, and even a bit of romance through his music is truly commendable. It just goes to show that even when we think we know what to expect from a film soundtrack, Elfman manages to surprise us with his creativity and skill. But enough about my love for Danny Elfman's compositions. Let's return our discussion back to the topic at hand, the film itself. Thomas dearest, what are your thoughts on the cast and their performances in ParaNorman? Specifically, how do you feel about the portrayal of Norman by the talented young actor Kodi Smit-McPhee?
Well, Timothy dearest, I must admit that the cast of ParaNorman did a decent job with what they were given. Kodi Smit-McPhee, who portrayed Norman, brought a perfect mix of awkward teenage angst and reluctant heroism to his character. His portrayal of someone who just wants to be normal but is constantly reminded of his unique abilities was quite convincing. As for the supporting cast, they all played their respective roles well, whether it was providing comic relief or adding depth to the story. However, I must point out that the characterization of some characters felt a bit stereotypical, especially that of the bully, who was more mean-spirited than actually menacing. And while we're on the subject of characters, what do you think about the portrayal of Norman's family? Specifically his grandmother, played by the late, great Elaine Stritch.
Ah, yes, dearest Tom. I must say that the casting director indeed struck gold with their choices for the roles of Norman's family. His strict father, voiced by the talented John Goodman, perfectly embodies the typical working-class dad who just wants his son to stay grounded and focus on more normal things like sports or girls. And then there's his eccentric, paranormal-obsessed mother, played by the legendary Leslie Mann, who, while maybe a bit overbearing at times, genuinely cares for her son and tries to help him embrace his unique abilities. But it's Norman's grandmother, played by the late, great Elaine Stritch, who steals every scene she is in with her feisty, no-nonsense attitude and deep knowledge of the supernatural world. She serves as both a source of strength and guidance for Norman throughout his journey and provides much-needed comedic relief during some of the film's darker moments. So, Thomas dearest, in conclusion, while ParaNorman might not have been everyone's cup of tea, it does boast a talented cast who brought life to their respective characters, both human and otherwise. The film's balance between horror and humor as well as its heartwarming story of acceptance and redemption, make it a worthy watch for fans of the genre. But now, dearest Thomas, let us move on to our next cinematic adventure, shall we?
Timothy, dearest, I must admit that even though I personally found ParaNorman to be a bit of a letdown, it did manage to capture some aspects of modern culture quite accurately. For instance, the film's portrayal of social media and how it can amplify rumors and falsehoods is eerily relevant to our own times. The way people quickly jump to conclusions based on incomplete information or even outright fabrications is a sad reality that we as a society need to confront head-on. And speaking of modern society, the film's portrayal of small-town life and how tight-knit communities can sometimes become insular and suspicious of anything perceived as different or other also resonates strongly with us today. The fear of change and the reluctance to accept new ideas or ways of living are all too familiar themes in many towns and cities around the world, not just in the fictional town of Blythe Hollow. ParaNorman's portrayal of bullying, both physical and emotional, also hits close to home for many viewers, especially young ones who might be dealing with similar situations in their own lives. The film's message of standing up for yourself and others is a powerful one that should be applauded. Timothy, dearest, do you agree with me? Did ParaNorman manage to capture any other cultural elements that resonated with you? And finally, how do you think the film's portrayal of these issues has aged since its release in 2012?
Well said, dearest Thomas. ParaNorman does indeed tackle some pertinent issues that still plague us today, albeit in a delightfully spooky animated package. Despite our differing opinions on its overall quality, we can't deny the film's impact on the stop-motion animation genre and its ability to captivate both young and old alike with its mix of humor, horror, and heartwarming story. And who doesn't love a good haunted house tour, eh? In conclusion, if you haven't given ParaNorman a chance yet, I implore you, dear viewers, to give it a go. It might not be your cup of tea, but hey, I'm sure there's something for everyone in the realms of cinema. Just like there are probably some ghostly friends waiting for you in the spookiest corners of the internet. So, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, like this video. And until next time, farewell, dear viewers, and don't forget to check your closet for any ghoulish visitors tonight.